This is the Skin in the Game VC podcast, hosted by Tom Wallace, entrepreneur turned venture capitalist and the managing partner at Florida Funders, along with Saxon Baum, general partner and head of investor relations at Florida Funders. You'll learn from the best about investing in early stage tech companies, so you too can gain the confidence and find the tools that help you succeed as an angel investor. Are you ready to get some skin in the game?
Welcome. My name's Tom Wallace, and I'm one of the partners at Florida Funders, and I'm here with my co-host of the Skin in the Game podcast, Saxon Baum.
Hey, how is everybody? Great to see everyone. Tom, great to see you as always.
Sax, likewise. So before we introduce our guest, who we have another exciting guest, I frankly am still impressed by some of the guests we get to come on the pod. I mean, these are really impressive people that I learn a lot from and enjoy a lot, and hopefully our audience does too. So we'd like to kick things off by bantering a bit back and forth on what's going on in tech. Sax, what do you see? What are your thoughts on any new developments, anything new and exciting you want to...
Yeah, I think the first thing as of this morning that I wanted to bring up was the pullback in the crypto market. And just so that everybody knows, today is the 20th of March. So who knows what will happen next week. But as of today, we've had a huge bull run, obviously, over the last, Tom, probably 6 months in crypto. But we're seeing a pretty big pullback, 10-15%, primarily on the major kind of coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum. The question that I have for you, and I know that you're a bigger crypto investor than me, have the crypto natives and the big crypto investors finally learned to take gains?
Well, I think they're taking some gains. I think clearly that's happening. The run-up, this run-up has been caused, in my opinion, and I think most people would agree with this, by two things. One is the SEC opening up the ETFs, and there's 10 ETFs, including ARK. Kathy Wood, who we just had at our investor event, talked about this. I think her ARK ETF for Bitcoin has already brought in almost $2 billion.
Yeah, she said about $2 billion, right?
And we can get into how that's affecting Coinbase, because Coinbase is the custodian of 90% of that. Coinbase stock has gone up a lot more than Bitcoin or Ethereum, for that matter. The second thing is we have the halving of Bitcoin that's coming up, so that's any week now, right? So coming into a halving, which is a period where the production of Bitcoin is going to get cut in half, is about to happen. So those two things together, really drove the price up. I think taking some gains is pretty common. Well, not pretty common, maybe in the past, but I think only smart. Investors, especially, take some chips off the table. Doesn't mean you're taking them all off. No. But, I think it's just a pause. I think, we're going to continue to see Bitcoin go up from here, is my opinion, and hopefully drag a lot of the other, coins along with it, or crypto, the good ones that have real companies behind them and are real businesses. So.
Do you still see 100K by the end of the year?
That's what Kathy Wood said.
That's right. That was not what Tom said. That's what Kathy Wood told us at our event.
Yeah, at our event, she said that. Yeah, I think she could be right about that. Yeah. I do. Yeah. But Coinbase is up, Bitcoin's up, double in the last 6 months or whatever. It was at, 17, not that long ago, a year ago or whatever. But, Coinbase is up a lot more than that. Yeah. And, it's going to be interesting to see a lot. I read a lot about this, and there's pundits that say that Coinbase is the most overpriced stock on, out there, and then there are people say it's got a lot more to go. You don't make a lot of money as a custodian of, even though it's billions and billions of dollars. It's trading where Coinbase makes their money. They have a couple other revenue streams too with yields and stuff. But so that'll be interesting.
Talk about AI. We always talk about AI over the last 6 months. You brought up a great new product that I actually wasn't aware of.
Yeah, Devin, some of you probably heard about Devin. It's from a startup, and it is Microsoft's Copilot is a product that a lot of our CTO, chief technology officers, and a lot of portfolio companies are using in their coding staffs, and it kind of augments coding, and it's making coders, software coders and engineers more productive. Devin kind of takes that to a whole nother level, as one of our CTOs explained to me, and it really almost replaces some coders. So an engineer could have several agents under them that were actually
virtual agents
that they could be giving tasks to whether write an app, write a website. So it's going to take the productivity of programmers to an entirely another level, where I think in the past, I was listening to the All In podcast with Jason Calacanis, who we've had on our podcast, and I don't know, it was Shamat or David Sachs was talking about this, that in the past it took about 12 people, programmers, to build an app, and if you were starting from scratch and trying to build something that you were going to take to market, and now they think they can do it with like one or two, and the idea of having a company, an entire company that consists of like two people or one person company that has a market cap of over $1 billion. I mean, they're talking about things like that. So it's kind of crazy. It's early, but it's moving fast. I mean, AI is moving fast.
Well, I think the other thing about development around AI, and they've talked about this on the All In Pod, and I agree with this because I'm just seeing it on a smaller scale using ChatGPT and other sorts of AI products, is software development is going to be accessible via the layman. So in maybe less than a year, you or I, who are not software developers, we understand software and architecture, but are not software developers, we're maybe going to be able to build product via input that is just text. And so that is very interesting to me. Me, who's not a technologist, being able to build a technology product without having to find a CTO or without having to find technical resources, that I think opens up the world to a whole new game in terms of product and company development.
Yeah, I mean, there's never been a better time to start a company. You think about, with the cloud and now with AI, I mean, you can just do it so much more be so much more capital efficient and have to raise so much less capital. So it's going to be really interesting. We just had a guest on our previous podcast, Delian, and I always have a tough time with his last name, but
I think everybody does.
But he's an MIT guy, super sharp, and he was saying that 90% of AI is going to be controlled by kind of the big five. Microsoft, Google, whoever. I don't agree with that. This Devon came out of nowhere. It's a startup. I still think startups are going to. I think the next Google or AI, or the next Google or the next Microsoft is being born right now. It's an AI company. And I think the other thing that you're going to see with AI is vertical markets. So you're going to see these agents that are lawyer agents, accountant agents that you can give. A lawyer now, instead of having all these assistants and a staff, is just going to be so much more efficient. They're going to have these agents that do a lot of the work for them.
Two other things on AI. NVIDIA just talked about their new chip. I think it's called Blackwell.
He was a mathematician, I think.
So that was extremely impressive, just where they're going in terms of compute power and GPU power. And then Apple announced that they're potentially integrating in Google AI with the new iPhone. Google stock was up pretty big earlier this week. Has Apple given up on the AI race?
I should have known Google stock was going to go up because I've owned Google stock for a long time, and I moved a bunch of it into my foundation. So they always say when you put your biggest gains, move them over so you don't pay taxes on it. So sure, it went up, and the timing of that. I don't. It's interesting. Is Google going to be the answer to fixing Siri? Please help us.
You've been talking about that. Somebody needs to fix Siri. We've been talking about that for years.
Goddamn Siri. I mean, thing drives me crazy. I probably shouldn't use it as much because, admittedly, I use it sometimes when I'm driving. But I'm not texting while I'm driving. I'm trying to use Siri while I'm driving.
But I guess we'll see it, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I think they're strange bedfellows, but I think Google's probably and Apple are probably looking at like, hey, they kind of got usurped or beat to the, especially Google because they invested in DeepMind, early with AI, but. ChatGPT and Microsoft have kind of surpassed them. Now they're kind of playing catch up. So maybe they're going to align to take on, Sam Altman.
Oh, interesting theory.
And Microsoft. That's what I think is probably going on.
Interesting theory.
But the wars of Silicon Valley and the big boys, and
we'll see how it plays out, right?
Yeah.
Well, looking forward to having our guest here, and thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you. So for those of you who are new to the pod, we do this pretty frequently, and we like to have guests on that have great stories to tell, that are founders or investors or both, oftentimes the case. We've had fabulous guests on in the past, like Alex Ohanian and Jason Calacanis And who else, Saxon?
Lucy Go.
Oh, Lucy Go.
Yeah, as of recent, Joey Levy. We've had some great guests, entrepreneurs and investors, which is one that we have today. So
yeah. So Delian, welcome. Delian I'm sorry. Let me do it again. Delian Asparouhov. Say it again.
Asparouhov.
Asparouhov. Okay.
Asparouhov.
Yes. Asparouhov.
There you go.
You got it?
There you go. Nailed it.
Okay. Welcome, Delian Asparouhov. I'm working on his last name, so I think I got it right. Did I get it right that time?
Yeah, you got it right that time. Well done.
But Delian's got a really exciting background, and we're really excited to have you with us. You're coming to us from Miami, correct?
Yeah, South Florida, got to represent, West Coast and East Coast, both sides.
That's what it's all about, Bay to Bay, except for just in the state of Florida.
Exactly. Sea to shining sea, just, Gulf of Mexico and the, Atlantic.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
So, Delian, my understanding is you're an immigrant, which is great. And you have a really exciting background. So why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I was originally born in, Sofia, Bulgaria, the capital, just shortly after the fall of the communist regime. And my parents and I actually moved to the United States when I was about, sort of 3.5 years old, when my parents became grad students at Caltech in Pasadena, California, which is in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Sort of grew up in a very in some ways like traditional immigrant household in the United States, right? We came here with $600 in our pocket, hard work and academics, was, sort of the, standard values of the household, let's say. Mm-hmm. Every day after, finishing up school, I would do an additional sort of 3 to 4 hours with my, dad around, sort of additional mathematics schooling. In the summer was going to, sort of math camps, robotics camps, things like that. Ultimately in some ways in the United States, I feel like, sort of achieved the, sort of my at least parents' dream for their children, which was, senior year of high school, getting into, MIT, which I think is probably the happiest I've ever, sort of made, my parents. Ended up, sort of going off to, academia and, quickly realizing that, it wasn't necessarily for me. Both my parents are PhDs, my mom's a professor. And so I'd always kind of assumed that my life was headed, down this, sort of academic path that, I similarly needed to have, sort of lots and lots of results, in Google Scholar when, you put in the name Asparouhov alongside, sort of mom and dad. But, about a year and a half into, sort of MIT, kind of had a couple of realizations. The first was, I spent this summer, between freshman and sophomore year out in Silicon Valley, working at Square. It was sort of like my first ever, let's say, like Silicon Valley, job. I'd been a software engineer before that, but for more, sort of traditional companies, and just totally fell in love with the world of innovation entrepreneurship. And I felt like I learned way more in those like 3 months, from, Jack Dorsey and crew than I learned in the entire prior year at MIT. And so I kind of had this realization in the middle of sophomore year where I was like, what am I sort of doing here? Like I already am a professional software engineer. I don't need any more, sort of engineering classes at this point. Mm-hmm. And I'm just paying, sort of $50,000 a year versus, I basically applied for this program called the Thiel Fellowship where Peter Thiel was basically offering to instead pay me $50,000 a year, to go, sort of work on an independent, startup idea. And so, made my parents the happiest ever by, getting into
how'd
MIT.
that phone call go when you told them you were dropping out of MIT?
Not great. Yeah, not great. My mom at the time, basically, had my sister was, 4 or 5 years old at the time, and basically had my sister pen a handwritten letter to me, basically saying like, Delian, what are you going to do if like mom and dad get in a car accident and you need to be the primary caregiver for your younger siblings? You're not going to be able to do that because you don't have a degree and you don't have a job, and so you're going to be homeless, and so we're going to go into foster care. And so what are you going to do?
How much of that came from your parents? Did they really write that letter? It
was obviously my mom just telling my little sister what to write. It was obviously not my like 4 or 5 year old little sister who has no conception of what college is or what foster care even is. So, but it was very cutely sort of written. It was clearly sort of handwritten by her. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. It's so funny sometimes to like talk to people where even when they're 19, 20, 21, just care so much about sort of the parents' opinion of their, let's say, sort of career path. And for me, it just like, at the time was just like not at all part of the calculus for, my decision making. I was like, cool letter, still doing the Thiel Fellowship, still dropping out, love the feedback.
Good for you.
But I'm out of here. I care a lot. I've always cared a lot about like what my mom thought of like my like partners and girlfriends and, sort of now wife. So I cared about it on the personal side, but I think something on the professional side, I was like, you guys like came from like the fall of the Soviet Union. I understand why you guys are so risk averse, but like, I'm somebody who literally just had a job as a professional software engineer where if I asked for a full-time offer, it would have been like $160K a year. So like my downside protection is not that I'm going to be homeless on the streets of San Francisco. My downside protection is like, I'm going to have a very cushy job in tech, which is what people aim for at the end of the MIT degree, versus I have it basically today. So I was like, doing the sort of risky startup thing seems sort of pretty reasonable thing to take on.
When did you start writing code?
Pretty early on. I don't know that I have like an exact date, but my dad for a while, I was very, still am very addicted to video games. But, when I was a kid, my dad would basically set up various like, sort of security regimes on the home Wi-Fi. And basically each time I was able to get around it, I basically kind of got like a free pass for a day where I was allowed to play as many video games as I wanted. And then he would establish, more, sort of stringent security regime. And so in some ways, I feel like that was where I first learned about computers, was just like me and my dad like battling one another to like, sort of figure out who could have control of the home Wi-Fi.
It was life or death for you to be able to play video games when you were young.
Oh yeah. Oh man, I did like crazy things. I would like, wake up at 3:00 in the morning, game for 2 hours until 5 a.m. and then like go back to bed because I knew that my dad would check in at 6 a.m. to see if I was like sleeping or playing video games. So yeah, I did, absurd things to my like, sleep schedule in order to make sure I got, some hours in. Plenty of times, like I have so many memories of being a kid at like 3:30 in the morning, my dad barging into the room and being like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, get back to bed. Like, it's the middle of the night. You cannot be gaming right now. What is wrong with you?" I'm sure I will be doing the same thing to my son, in a couple of years. But that was when I maybe first got into the world of computers. And then I vaguely remember, I think like the first time that like I remember I like set up a like home server and coded up a little website because I remember bugging my dad to set up like tunnel, what is it called? Tunnel, God, I don't even remember the name anymore. Is it port tunneling? There we go, port tunneling, so that I could basically run a like server from my like home desktop computer for a website that I could like send to my friends as a link. And I just remember like messaging my friend a link, I want to say in like 8th grade, and being like, pull this up on your computer, like show me what you see. And then him seeing I don't even remember what it was. I think it was just like some text on a screen. It wasn't like a fancy website or anything. But I remember just like my mind being blown where like it finally clicked for me where I was like, oh, like the internet and the things that I'm visiting are actually just like other people's personal computers, basically in data centers and things like that. But like I can do that too. Like I can set up a sort of PC. And so yeah, I pretty like quickly accelerated from there. Thankfully my high school actually had like a computer programming class, which is a very funny class because the teacher didn't really code, but all the students were quite good, sort of coders and learned quite well. And so the class was mostly him, letting us, do whatever we wanted on the computers, but then similarly him fighting really, really hard to make it so that we weren't just playing video games in all the computer programming class.
There's a common theme here
and
around
him
video
also.
games.
Yeah, exactly. It turns out actually like a lot of my coding all goes back to like, fighting against like video games. So the school obviously had even more stringent security systems, et cetera. But then again, we would all work together as a class to basically, sort of get around. And then eventually I actually convinced them, okay, hey, actually, is it okay if we play games that we coded ourselves? So eventually the team got together, or like the class got together, and we like actually ended up like, coding up these like little, kind of flash looking games that were actually pretty fun. One of them I'm very, sort of, hooked on, and there's been some modern, sort of equivalents of it. That we would code together. And then it started turning into like, sort of pranking as well, where I remember I got in a lot of trouble. At one point in high school, I figured out how to get into like the boot script of the school PCs. And it would look at the student ID of whoever was logging in to determine basically like, I think like what access they had or something like that. So then I put in a script that would basically look at the student ID. And for this one particular friend of mine, I would set up something where after you logged into the school computer, it would take over the entire screen, and it would be this like cow that would just like moo at you nonstop, and then it had like these like flashing lights and like, you know, a little bit like, you know, disco ball like, you know, noises, and it disabled all computer input, including the like power button of the computer. So literally the only way to actually turn off the computer is you had to like physically unplug it from the wall, which was actually difficult to do in some of these like school labs. So the student, whenever he would try to log into any computer in the entire school, basically got stuck like that. I got in a lot of trouble after that. I had to obviously go and like, change that script. I tried to hide. I don't remember how they caught me even either. I think I eventually like fessed up because they were like security guards, or like I think maybe like somebody like tattled on me because like, you know, I told them about the script or something like that. But anyway, so yeah, I got in a lot of trouble. I mean, that also comes back at MIT. I also got in a lot of trouble at MIT for computer stuff as well. But yeah, so that was, you know, probably like, you know, the playing around. And then the first like really serious project that I did was there was this high school robotics competition called First Robotics, still around today. It's something that I'm a huge fan of. But they basically set up these like sort of super intense 2-month period, January, February every year, where they basically January 1st release like a new game. And the game each year basically kind of looks like it's either like basketball or soccer, or there's like, you know, rings that you have to put on a hoop or things like it, or like, you know, on a hook. Basically like, you know, sort of various kind of like, you know, physical games, but the games are played entirely inside of this robotics arena via robots that you have to design. And so that was my first real coding endeavor, where it was like, you know, probably a 12-person, 13-person software engineering team. I was basically the software lead of that team for 3 years in a row, you know, basically managing all of the software and writing, honestly, you know, probably, you know, at least, you know, the majority of it basically, you know, sort of myself. And then obviously you do sort of have production environments where, you know, we would actually go out to these competitions, and I would not only be the one coding the robot, but then I would also code like the user interface in that, like what the actual joysticks and controllers did. And then I would actually use that myself. I was the like primary driver for the competitions, where I would actually then in these very intense environments where you're like in these like 3-minute competitive rings with all the other robots, and I would actually be like physically, you know, basically like be the one, you know, driving it as well. I still sometimes watch, there's like this like, you know, 2000, you know, sort of 10 when we were in like the like finals of like one of the regional competitions. I like still sometimes watch that video and my like heart palpitates because I just remember that like we got so close. We were like literally like 2 points away. And it was one of these things that really actually came down to like my physical skill as a driver, where like if I just made slightly different decisions, I think we could have won the competition. And then from there, basically, you know, had a couple of like professional software engineering gigs. One was actually, you know, sort of for my dad's company. They make this like statistical, you know, sort of software. I ended up like working with him for a summer. And then one was actually for one of the largest like gas station companies in the United States. It's called Maverick. They're sort of more prominent in like Utah, Colorado, like Montana, you know, kind of area. Basically for them, that was a kind of a, you know, sort of fun summer role. This was like the summer after senior year of high school, so before college. They hired me originally for like a 3-month contract where they basically were doing a lot of very manual data analysis to basically predict new store location potential revenue by basically analyzing everything from traffic volumes at that location to nearby competitive gas pricing to, you know, what their other stores, you know, within the same zip code were, you know, sort of doing. And they originally had a floor of like 30 people that were doing this, you know, sort of very manual, you know, Excel analysis. And they brought me in basically asking like, you know, can you help automate this? And I'd never done, you know, Excel has its own, I don't even remember what it's called. I think it's called Visual Basic, I want to say. It has its own, like, Excel has its own, like, programming language. But it basically, you know, ended up going super deep. And then, you know, over the course of, I think it was only like, you know, sort of 4 or 5 weeks, actually ended up like automating the jobs of the entire, you know, sort of floor of people that were originally, you know, sort of working on this. And so after 5 weeks, they didn't have anything for me to do anymore, but they were happy with me because I just automated a ton of work for them. But I still quit because I was like, I'm just bored. Like, I don't want to commute into this office and like all these people hate me now because like I like basically got fired. So.
Hey, Delian, so you got the Thiel Fellowship. You drop out of MIT. What was the idea you presented to get the Thiel Fellowship, which is a great honor, of course, and what'd you do from there?
Yeah. So this was, so, you know, sort of I go off to MIT and then I work at Square freshman summer. And then basically sophomore year is when I applied for the, you know, sort of Thiel Fellowship. The original idea was around basically like medication adherence. It was meant to be a like mobile app that would basically, you know, monitor a ton of basically, you know, sort of sensor signals from your phone to help you with adherence of medications. Let's say you needed to take something, you know, right before bed at 8:30 p.m. each night. We would like, you know, geofence your house so that like when you got home at the end of the night, it would ping you right as you entered the door rather than just basically at like a fixed time, so that it was actually, sort of easier to actually, sort of build the habit around the adherence towards your medication. That was the original idea. We ended up getting in for that. We sort of pivoted about 6 or 9 months in to actually be focused on a more narrow, let's say, sort of specialty within healthcare around behavioral and speech therapy for young children with autism. It was still sort of the same fundamental software, both around medication tracking, but there was more broad tracking around behavior tracking, which is relevant for young children with autism. So yeah, that was my first company, Nightingale. Ended up sort of working on that for about sort of 3.5 years. Before, ultimately, and we went through, sort of Y Combinator, sort of raised a small seed round of $600,000, scaled to like, I think our like peak month was, I think we got about 20K MRR, in 1 month. And so we got to like, for two 19-year-old MIT, sort of college dropouts, that, knew nothing about sales. We actually got to a sort of reasonable level of sales and like sort of like ramen profitability for a period of time where, basically funded the company for a long time just off of revenues. But, ultimately after 3.5 years, just realized that we weren't, continuing to advance and continuing to make progress. And so sort of soft shut down the company and ended up, going to work with this company Teespring for a bit. And then eventually after, about 2 years of it being sort of soft shut down, where we still were running the servers and people were paying us, just nobody was working on it. We eventually actually sold the company to basically one of the very early clients of the software. So it was a very interesting experience in that, it wasn't a massive success or anything like that. But, as a 19-year-old to go from, somebody who had really only done, sort of computer science, engineering, software, coding, basically, to go from that to I had to, fundraise, I had to do sales, I was running all customer support, I had to learn how to be a manager, I had to obviously, apply to programs like Y Combinator and convince them to let us in. I think just like, relative to if I looked at like my peers at MIT that just continued to take obviously software engineering classes, I think I just learned a much, sort of broader.
Sounds like you got an MBA there, mini MBA.
Yeah. In some ways, it's like the best possible, sort of MBA. And I think it really set me up well for, what I sort of do now, where I still think that I would not be where I am in my career today, if not for my, sort of technical and engineering, sort of background. But obviously, if you look, sort of day to day today, I probably haven't written like a serious, sort of line of code now. I think in like 4.5 years, basically, maybe one day, future Delian will, sort of delve a little bit back towards the world of engineering. But for now, sort of combine my technical background with, I think, a lot of what I learned in my first company, to, I think, both be a much more effective, investor, but also, a much more effective entrepreneur, where at Varda, the company that I started, a lot of my role is more, sort of externally facing to, customers, investors, media, et cetera. But again, part of why I think I'm effective in some of that externally facing, in those externally facing roles is because of that, sort of prior engineering background.
So I want to come back to Varda because that's a huge part of the story that we want to hear about today and how you started that business while also being at Founders Fund. We're always interested to see kind of this dual role that we see with investors and founders. Talk about how you got into the investing world. Obviously, Founders Fund is a top tier venture capital fund in the world, one of the best. How did you get your foot in the door there? Was it the prior relationship with Peter Thiel? And just give us a story about how you got in with one of the best firms in the world.
Yeah, it's funny, for a long time, I was very anti the idea of being an investor. I saw it as something that, I thought you only basically did in like semi-retirement. And, it was, something that I shouldn't really consider until I was like, call it north of 45 or 50, sort of years old. And yet, if I study some of my early career, there was a lot of signals that should have told me that it was something that I was actually, sort of very, interested in and potentially, had the, skill set to be, sort of decent at. Probably my very, very, sort of first, foray was in some ways that, sort of, internship at Square, where this is just the first exposure to Silicon Valley, the world of venture capital. I believe at the time we raised our series, sort of D and announced it. And so it was the first time that I learned about, let's say, sort of startups and venture funding. Came back to MIT basically that fall of, sort of sophomore year. And, it was very fortuitous, lucky, maybe because of the, sort of Square background and, some of the public profile that I built up, sort of back then, very much smaller than obviously, what I've got today. But I was reached out to by this guy, Peter Boyce, who was a senior at Harvard at the time, that that was basically previously interning at General Catalyst, and had convinced them to basically start a student-run venture capital firm where we were given a budget of I think something like $150K basically a year to invest in basically as many student-run startups that we wanted, and the ultimate decision makers of those investments were students, sort of themselves. And so he actually recruited me to be in basically the first class of student VCs for this fund. It was called Rough Draft, sort of VC. And so for sophomore year, while I was in the midst of basically mostly being focused on sort of dropping out and figuring out how to get the Thiel Fellowship, every week I would bike over to General Catalyst's office over in Cambridge. From my fraternity in Boston, and we would take pitches for I forgot exactly, but probably probably 2 or 3 hours every Monday evening, I want to say, and made a sort of decent number of investments, some of which actually turned out to be pretty reasonable. There's this one company I'm forgetting what it's called, but it was this defense tech or unicorn. That was one of the very early sort of defense robotics success cases that we invested in 2012, and I think became a unicorn in 2017, 18. So that was probably my first foray, let's say, into investing. Obviously dropped out to then work on my company. But even while working on my company, one of the things that I would always spend a lot of time on, and especially after getting into Y Combinator, was, sort of helping, the sort of next generation of founders behind me. In each Y Combinator batch, I would basically, sort of publicly offer on Twitter, basically Y Combinator mock interviews, which was something that a lot of alumni, would do. And I did a lot of mock interviews. I think for a long time, for 2 or 3 years, from the 2014 through 17 timeframe, I probably sort of was the highest sort of count of mock interviews of any sort of YC alumni, and YC would even have me help with their application reviews. They did that with a bunch of alumni, not just me or anything. But in some ways, I always found a lot of sort of joy and really enjoyed those processes, even though that in some ways is more reflective of an investing role than it is of sort of being sort of a founder role. So in some ways, now retrospectively looking at it, I had so many signals that I actually liked investing. I was doing it. I was actually enjoying it, and potentially had the skill set to be good at it. But I, again, continued to sort of discount it as a potential sort of full-time career path, and then in some ways kind of stumbled into it. Shortly after leaving, sort of Teespring, which is where I went after my first company. And it was in some ways truly accidental. Sort of Keith Raboy, sort of one of my longtime, sort of mentors and close friends, was basically considering, adding a sort of chief of staff, to his, team, at Coastal Ventures. And, basically, sort of offered me, the job over a dinner that we had. So yeah, I had a lot of early signals that I, was interested in venture. Yeah, both the, sort of time at Rough Draft, some of these Y Combinator mock interviews, but yeah, the way that I ended up at Coastal Ventures was Keith was basically thinking, Keith Raboy, who had been one of my, sort of early, sort of mentors, up through my, startup, and then at Teespring, was basically thinking about, hiring a chief of staff to his team at Coastal Ventures, and basically, made me an offer over dinner. And as I, sort of started to think about it, and, I still wanted to start another company, one day, but I realized just working so closely with one of the, sort of world's greatest entrepreneurs, investors at one of the world's greatest firms, I've just learned so much, both from him directly, but as well as just watching a lot of world-class entrepreneurs pitch their businesses, sort of to Coastal Ventures. And I just, remember even sort of 3 or 4 months into that role, realizing I had this one idea that I wanted to, sort of start around cybersecurity, insurance. And that was what I wanted to leave Coastal Ventures to go do at some point. And I remember we met a handful of, sort of founding teams that were working on it. And I remember meeting them and being like, oh my God, these teams are so world-class. These are the people that are this is their life's work and meant to go solve this particular problem. I was like, any founding team that I could put together would pale in comparison to these guys. We absolutely, should invest in this, rather than, me going off and starting this myself. And so, yeah, I was, very, very grateful to have that opportunity, because I think it sort of set the bar for me on, what, level of quality of idea, quality of founding team I should expect if I ever wanted to start an idea myself. And then also 6 months in, I think I started to realize, man, I'm actually really enjoying this way more so than I enjoyed being CEO of my own company. And I started to reflect on, I've actually always really enjoyed this. I really love my time at Rough Draft. I love those Y Combinator mock interviews. And I think a part of it is I'm very ADD. I'm intellectually curious. I love actually, sort of advising and helping founders. I'm not as much of a fan of the day-to-day management, especially of sort of team members. I don't think that's something that I'm very, sort of strong at or get a lot of, sort of motivation from. And so I, sort of leaned into the role. And I was actually like, hey, rather than after 1 year just leaving and starting another company, Keith and Coastal Ventures crew, would you guys be open to me actually just sticking around and basically continuing to do this? And, sort of was very, sort of grateful that they were, open to me sticking around.
And how did that parlay into Founders Fund? Because obviously there's the connection points between Coastal Founders Fund with Keith. Was that the connection point?
Yeah. So, after about a, sort of year and a half at Coastal Ventures, Peter Thiel was looking to basically hire somebody to run the, sort of early stage fund at Founders Fund. And sort of Keith was, top of his list. And so Peter and Keith started having conversations around, sort of him leaving Coastal Ventures to join Founders Fund. And as a part of that transition, Keith made it clear to Peter that he really wanted to bring me along with him, which obviously I was very, very, sort of grateful for. That was, in no ways guaranteed or, an expectation, of mine. And as we went through that interview process and talked with the sort of team at Founders Fund, I think both Keith and I were pretty enthusiastic about that opportunity, and so ultimately ended up deciding to make the switch over together in March 2019. And so I went through a very odd process where I kind of interviewed at Founders Fund, but not really. It was mostly Keith that they sort of wanted, and I was like the the sidekick that they were really familiar with, and not entirely sure that they were that excited to have me, but they were excited about Keith, and so whatever. They'll take the sidekick, if that's what, sort of Keith wants. And so, very much so, made my way to, Founders Fund via, let's say the back door, not the front door.
And this was all taking place in California, right?
Yeah. So this is all California.
So when did the move to Florida happen? And tell us about that.
Yeah, so, joined Founders Fund in March 2019. COVID hits, obviously March 2020. The fund takes a serious look at, Peter had always really wanted the fund to not necessarily be so based in San Francisco. And so we started basically debating where should we open, a second office. And obviously Keith was one of the ones that was most eager to, sort of move out of California. And so in some ways it was based on both, what did the broader fund, sort of think, but also what did, sort of Keith really want to do. And in some ways we just ranked cities, both in the United States and internationally across a variety of factors. It was just what is the tax environment? What is the weather? How great of an international airport does it have with how many flight routes? As one example, Nashville for a period of time was actually one of our top choices. But ultimately just the airport in Nashville didn't have.
Out of Nashville. It's
you just can't
not many international flights there. Obviously.
Yeah. And ultimately in some ways as investors, you're constantly having to travel to, go to, conferences, meet with companies, portfolio, companies, board meetings, et cetera. And so it just wasn't, reasonable. But across all those factors, including one being, is there some level of pre-existing scene that we can hopefully help amplify and make this into, sort of a major hub that eventually can actually compete against the San Francisco, New York, sort of LA ecosystems. And so, Miami landed on top of that list. Keith ends up, sort of moving in the, sort of October 2020 timeframe. I admit I was originally, sort of quite skeptical of the move. Again, I saw it as a place that, I didn't think it could have, a lot of, potential as being a future center of technology, and actually even publicly on Twitter, criticized sort of Keith for the move. And at the time was in the midst of, we're very open to, some public disagreement at Founders Fund, which I, quite enjoy. And at the time was basically in the midst of, sort of working on Varda. And so it was just very heads down in that, sort of what I call the 0 to 0.1 phase, right? Pulling together the founding team, the early capital, early employees, which is, very, sort of stressful, sort of time period. Because you're taking a huge, sort of swing, and it's a somewhat, irreversible, sort of career swing. And, thankfully in that time frame called September, October, November, San Francisco had, sort of somewhat reopened. Outdoor dining, was available. And so there was at least, I felt like some level of way to have personal release, after a very stressful professional day, because I could at least, go out and have dinner with my, at the time, girlfriend, sort of now, wife. And then I forget the exact date. It's something like December 8th, 2020. San Francisco shuts down outdoor dining to shut down the spread, which at the time I just thought was so inane. I was like, this is just incredibly insane to me. There's no scientific data that suggests there's any level of outdoor spread of COVID. The number of cases in San Francisco was so de minimis. And you have all these local businesses that have spent, tens of thousands of dollars to set up all this outdoor dining. And you're now basically having them shut down after just, a few months for completely ridiculous, sort of reasons. And so I remember in that moment, I was just in the bathroom, literally, sitting on the toilet, and was just man, screw this. You know what? Maybe Keith's right.
Maybe this is... send me over the edge. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm fucking out of here. And so it was sort of meant to be a little bit of like a pithy, sarcastic, sort of tweet, because I'd been so critical of Miami even the week prior. And so I just sent off this tweet sitting on the toilet. I was like, you know what, screw this. Maybe we should just move off Silicon Valley, to Miami. Like, hear me out. And obviously that tweet ends up going, sort of hyper viral. That's the tweet
heard around the world, as we say here.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Francis ends up, sort of quote tweeting it somewhat unintentionally with his catchphrase, which is "How can I help?" which is sort of a catchphrase that has a lot of irony in Silicon Valley, because it's like what we, sort of criticize VCs for saying, because it's like whenever VC doesn't want to invest, what they say is like, "How can I help?" basically. And so it's just like, it's very much so like, rung true in some ways, where I was like, oh my God, he kind of like replied with the like Silicon Valley insider joke.
It was too good. And he had no idea, obviously, at that point.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously then it just
This is Mayor Suarez, the mayor of Miami, for the listeners. I'm not sure everybody.
Oh, yeah. The mayor of Miami at the time, and currently mayor of Miami. Yeah. And so, at this moment, I still have not yet actually been in Miami. Like, I visited obviously years prior for like bachelor parties on South Beach and things like that, but never like a serious visit. And we were in the midst of, still in the early days of Varda. And so I didn't even have time really to come visit. But in March 21, I finally had a bit of time to, we just done our first board meeting, first hires, the office was set up. And so I was like, okay, let me go work from like the Founders Fund Miami office for a week, check it out. It was going to be Keith's birthday. Let me spend some sort of time out there. And at the beginning of the week, Francis Suarez actually invites me to this cafecito, which is still sort of public online, where basically the first question he asked me is like, Delian, when are you moving to Miami? And I basically was like, look, I have a company that's in LA. It would be too tricky to be on the other, sort of coast of it. My life is in, sort of San Francisco. My friends are in San Francisco. I don't think that, I can do this necessarily anytime soon, but I love what you guys are doing. Sort of love this, sort of movement. I do think that San Francisco has a lot of problems, and somebody should offer a legitimate, sort of alternative. And then, at the end of the week, I had just like totally fallen in love with the ecosystem and the climate. I like closed several term sheets while I was in the, Founders Fund Miami office. And I sort of realized, I was like, man, these term sheets aren't even companies that are in San Francisco. I obviously did this while not in San Francisco. And so clearly I can be productive here. And just like the culture, the climate, the food, I was like, this is a place where I just feel so much happier, so much more productive. I'm able to like work much harder hours here because I feel so much more value aligned, and just like the food is better for my like, stomach here. Just like very like base inputs, as a human are so much better. And my wife and the, my then girlfriend, now wife, had a very, sort of parallel experience. She had a set of friends from San Francisco that had moved here, and she just had a really phenomenal time. And so I remember basically at the end of the week, she'd gone off and like spent some time in Orlando. I was out down in Miami. So we hadn't sort of seen each other for most of the week. And then we like meet up at this dinner on Friday, with a bunch of, sort of our friends, Keith's friends, et cetera. And at one point, I don't remember who, but like, I think somebody, sort of shouted at us, basically being like, you guys had such a great time this week. When are you moving here? And my wife and I, my then girlfriend and I, looked at each other, and with no discussion, like, this is the first time that we'd spoken to each other basically in a week. We both just like looked at each other, we're like, we're going to move here immediately. And that was it.
Good thing you guys were both on the same page, because that could have gone really bad.
Exactly. We were both like clearly on the same page.
What?
But yeah, from that, sort of from that Friday dinner to us purchasing a house in Miami was about basically 48 hours. And so, went from cafecito on a Monday to, basically by Sunday had bought a house in Miami.
Well, and since that dinner that you had, right? So that was, call it 3 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, almost exactly, actually.
Right. Like right around 3 years ago. What have you seen the Miami ecosystem really flourish around? I mean, have you seen a lot of great change? What are the pros? What are the cons right now as we sit here in early 24? What are your thoughts on the Miami ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to like, graph, the Miami ecosystem growth, it definitely went through this like sort of hyper accelerated, sort of growth. And then in some ways, the entire sort of venture tech community all went through a contraction in 22 and 23. But I still think, Miami is, sort of very much so back to a, sort of positive trend line. I think in some ways it has a lot more of the more interesting aspects of technology. Like I'd argue in 21, we were like over rotated to, crypto in terms of representation in the Miami ecosystem versus now. Versus, now there's, drones, there's, power generation, sort of next generation around solar that's like, in the Wynwood area. There's a ton of very interesting, basically, sort of companies, being built. And so I think it still, has a really strong potential that I think by the end of the decade, it can be in the, sort of cohort of, let's say, like the very strongest, let's say, second class, hubs, call it New York, LA, right? And then I think over the next, sort of 10 to 15 years, I do think it has the ability to challenge San Francisco in terms of, sort of being the tech capital. And a part of it is I just think that fundamentally just the values of the city are so much more aligned with what I see as what the future of, the model cities of America should represent and what I think technology represents. The city is pro-growth, pro-capitalism, pro-innovation versus I would argue sort of San Francisco is actually anti all of those things. And the tech ecosystem, is barely managing to survive despite that, right? In some ways, I think it almost, sort of died for a brief period of time. And then, AI has provided somewhat of a revival that, we'll see, sort of how extensive that is. But I'm not convinced that, that is a bet that San Francisco can rely upon, as the only bet for the next 15 years. And I think the city will continue to drag it down. And so, I still think there's a long ways to go, obviously, to, getting to that point. I do think there are some things that are very proven at this point, in that I think Miami being the capital of capital, I think is already basically like a guaranteed bet. If you look at the number of, sort of PE, growth stage funds, hedge funds, the, Ken Griffins of the world, all the way down to like the VCs, absolutely, that is very clearly a very well-built ecosystem.
It doesn't seem like that ecosystem is going anywhere. I mean, and
that ecosystem is not going anywhere. Yeah. Like VCs can do their job from anywhere. There's a high quality of life, low taxes. There continues to be a strong influx of VCs moving here on a very, very regular basis. Like that is basically off into the races. And in some ways, actually, like the VC ecosystem in Miami is like way stronger than the VC ecosystem in LA, for example. If I were fundraising as a founder, my basically top 3 spots in the US would definitely be like SF, New York, Miami, much more so than LA, right? So, in some ways it's already become like a financing, sort of destination. So that's actually to me done. For late stage founders, especially if you look at founders that are like, north of, 3, 4, or 5 billion in market cap, where at that point, like your founder role is so externally facing that like, you being necessarily in the HQ of the office is less relevant. That is actually, sort of very strong. So the sort of very late stage and exited founder, ecosystem very strong. The area that I think actually is now in some ways, and those were not there when I moved here in 2021, right? So those two, things have grown while I've been here and have become phenomenally strong. The area that I've now started to spend sort of more of my focus and energy on is more around just like IC engineers and more, sort of first time founders that like 22 to sort of 30-year-old hyper technical, basically engineers and founders. And so you can see this very actively in this event that I run every year in Miami called Tech Week, where for the first few years we were focused on much basically like higher end events, more targeted towards sort of late stage founders and VCs. And now our entire basically Tech Week budget is actually more focused on basically like a large scale hackathon with a bunch of basically events surrounding that. And so in about sort of 3 weeks we have over 1,500 engineers descending upon Miami to ideally, both, have a very fun hackathon, but also be a, sort of great, sort of set of recruits for a lot of the companies that are here in Miami, and hopefully convince these engineers that this is, a legitimate ecosystem where they can, sort of come spend time. And so, I think, it's obviously got its, sort of pros and cons, and it's obviously, objectively, not yet near, LA and New York in terms of, number of founders and, sort of amount of invested capital. On the number of VCs, it is definitely, sort of there already. And I think in some ways that actually is a very helpful accelerant. So, I still think it has a ton of promise. I expect to be here for a very long time. This is where I want to raise, sort of my children. It's a, city that I think is, much more conducive to raising children with the values that I think are appropriate relative to anywhere else in the United States. And so, still think it has a ton of promise. And I, especially in the past 3 months, I think have also gotten much more convinced about the general potential of the entire Florida ecosystem. In that, I actually didn't appreciate this, but like one of the co-founders of NVIDIA is an ex, UF grad, and obviously he was in Gainesville, and he just donated, I think, like $20 million to a next generation semiconductor fab, sort of research center there. And so in terms of, I think, like the, UF, some of these, sort of local schools starting to actually generate real technical talent that feeds into, rather than the brain drain, going off to other states, feeds the local ecosystem, I feel much, sort of better about. And then obviously I do think, you you have the sort of, Jacksonville, Orlando corridor in space that I think will actually continue to grow, not just be an operations center, but also more of a manufacturing, engineering, and design center as well. And so, yeah, I just think, I don't know, I really think this like corridor from like here to Orlando, Tampa, the fact that we actually have like private rail that could eventually be high speed rail, I think this could become an extremely, sort of vibrant technology, ecosystem.
We agree with all that, Delian. Did your space company Varda? Did you move it from LA to Miami, or is it still in LA? Or
still in LA, and I think, for a long time, probably the HQ will have to, be there. Ultimately, a lot of the, early recruits are, ex-SpaceX recruits, but it is explicitly a goal of mine, as the company scales. I do want to eventually have a, sort of Miami office. We'll have to determine exactly sort of what makes sense to have here. I think some amount of, sort of space operations, sort of could make sense, especially given the proximity to the Cape. I do think some of our, sort of business development and legal work could happen here, both lower, sort of cost, lower cost of living, but then also if you look at, a lot of our basically, sort of legal and business development work, it is largely on the eastern sort of seaboard. And so we already have a DC office, which that type of work very much so makes sense to be in DC. But, I could be convinced that, rather than necessarily having an office in the Boston, New Jersey area, instead have an office in Miami and then, have folks regularly traveling to our pharmaceutical customers that are all up and down the eastern seaboard, including some in the Florida area. So, no, sort of Varda presence outside of myself in Florida yet. But obviously as a founder of the company, thankfully have some influence on, where we place future offices in the future.
Absolutely. Tom's going to do a lightning round, but real quick, just for our listeners, high level pitch, Varda, what do you guys do?
Sure. We are the first company to do in-space manufacturing of pharmaceuticals on a very cost-effective and fully autonomous platform. And so there's been about sort of 40 years of pharmaceutical research that has produced some really phenomenal results from the era of the space shuttle to Skylab on the International Space Station. And this has been done not only by individual pharmaceutical researchers, but also some of the sort of biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world: Merck, Eli Lilly, Janssen and Janssen. And these companies have shown that there's a ton of promise to enabling next generation pharmaceuticals with the sort of microgravity environment of space. But fundamentally, these types of sort of human rated platforms like the International Space Station are just far too costly, far too complex relative to the sort of work that is actually necessary. And so we basically flew our first pharmaceutical space factory in summer of 2023. It landed in February of 2024, about 4 weeks ago. And we're going to be continuing to do that on a regular basis, including for our customers, basically this summer for 2 publicly traded biotech companies that will be flying with us this summer on our second mission in summer of 2024.
Where did you land at Space Lab? Where did you?
In the middle of the Utah desert. Basically, we needed a very large and open, empty area, and the Utah desert was the largest of that in the United States.
Oh, curious. Oh, cool. That's really cool.
Interesting. Congratulations. I know there's some great news coming out here soon about the company. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we just had some publications come out of Forbes today covering basically like our first mission we just released today, the day of this recording, which is March 20th, 2024, just released basically the results of our, basically first pharmaceutical processing in orbit, and basically that everything performed exactly according to plan, entirely flawlessly. So super impressed with our team that the entire spacecraft performed flawlessly, the pharmaceutical processing performed flawlessly, that we have all of this data in hand and published. All of this has just been a really massive accelerant to the business.
Awesome.
Tom?
So we're running out of time. We do a little quick lightning round. These are just quick questions. Just give us a quick answer. Kind of random, but we like to do this. So, what do you think the price of Bitcoin will be in 3 years?
115K.
What's your favorite investment you've made in venture?
Probably this company, Sword Health. They're sort of digital physical therapist that is enabled by basically sort of sensors that allow you to basically do physical therapy in the comfort of your own home. They're maybe not the largest market cap. I do have one other investment that is sort of generated more market cap, but this is one where I felt that it was an investment that only I appreciated and was basically their earliest sort of Silicon Valley based backer, and sort of helped bring them sort of into the mainstream. And so it's one of those rare instances where most of the time I think investors are not particularly critical to a company's life, versus that is one where I do think I was a very helpful early sort of believer and enabler of the company's success.
Oh. What's the name of the company again? I'm sorry.
Sword Health.
Sword and Health. Okay. Who wins the AI race in your mind? Is it OpenAI? Is it Google? Is it some startup?
I think like 90% of the enterprise, value that is generated in the world of AI is going to be captured by like the top 5 in the NASDAQ. And so, and it'll probably be somewhat actually evenly distributed amongst all of them.
Interesting. Okay. And then what happens with X, formerly Twitter? You worked at Square. Elon has ideas of that being a payment. Do you see that working out and ending well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it actually has a ton of potential. It's even, especially since the Elon acquisition, I think it's so clearly become such a force in the like public discourse that I think it has cemented its place, in terms of a platform. And I do find that, under Elon's leadership, there's just so much more, interesting and regular innovation happening on the platform relative to sort of before. In some ways, it was pretty stagnant for the prior decade. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic about the platform.
Okay. And last question, when do you think we'll have fully autonomous vehicles in the United States?
So cars? I guess we already do, but across the entire United States, I think it's, relatively rapid, sort of rollout. If you look at, Waymo, they basically, now cover almost all of California in terms of population centers. So, across the entire United States, definitely, 100% within the next 5 years, and then actually probably a decent chance within the next 3 years to cover most of the United States.
Love that.
Yeah, cool. Well, Delian, this has been great. You've been really, really interesting. I'm sure our audience has really enjoyed your stories and your story, which is amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been amazing. We're looking forward to Miami Tech Week coming up here in 3 weeks. I know we're working on some stuff together, so that's going to be a great week. For all of our listeners, thank you so much for everything. Make sure to follow us and subscribe on our YouTube channel and share the links with anybody, founder, investor, whoever it might be. We love people to listen to what we have, and we love to have great guests on. So Delian, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Delian.
Thanks for spending your time with Skin in the Game VC today. If you want to learn more about investing in early stage tech like a venture capitalist, be sure to visit the Florida Funders website at floridafunders.com. Join our angel network at no cost and get access to Florida Funders VC vetted investment opportunities in the next great breakout tech companies.